Hi there. Human rights activists in the West often say that Muslim women are oppressed because they are forced to wear hijab or burqa. Unfortunately, this is not exactly the case. The fact is that more and more women voluntarily choose to wear hijab and burqas. Entire countries have veiled themselves during the last 30 years. Ayaan Hirsi Ali at one point was wearing a burqa because she was so inspired by the Islamic scholars that she listened to. I personally know a young Muslim woman who voluntarily wears a hijab, and at one point she wore a full burqa too. The point here is that Islam has some very attractive and powerful ideas that we need to counteract. Another example. A group of women in Saudi Arabia protested against the ban to drive cars for women. They ordered their drivers to come out of the car, and they drove themselves in the street of the capital city, Riyadh. And they were reported and arrested by the police. Who reported them? Devout Muslim women. This shows us a broader problem with Islam. For every secular reformer, you will get 10 fundamentalist reformers who honestly want to follow Muhammad and strict Sharia word for word. We should design counter-propaganda programs, and we should completely ban burqa everywhere in the civilized world, and put pressure on Muslim-majority countries to also ban burqa and get rid of the religious Sharia police that enforces hijab and burqa rules. The most repugnant example that I have encountered so far is when Muslim female activists in Kuwait advocate for enabling sex slavery according to the ruling of Islam. The reason behind this is this: using sex slaves is not a sin according to Islam. So, let's protect our men from sinning with free women by legally importing foreign female slaves. I will end this video with a citation from the book Complete Infidel's Guide to ISIS. Peace.
This is a verse from the Quran which is still in force and has not been abrogated. The milk al-yamin are the sex slaves. You go to the market, look at the sex slave and buy her. She becomes like your wife, but she doesn't need a marriage contract or a divorce like a free woman, nor does she need a wali. All scholars agree on this point. There is no disagreement from any of them. When I want a sex slave, I just go to the market and choose the woman I like and purchase her. Around the same time, a female Kuwaiti activist and politician, Salwa al-Mutairi, also spoke out in favor of the Islamic practice of sexual slavery of non-Muslim women, emphasizing that the practice accorded with Islamic law and morality. I received a message that was a little strange. A merchant told me that he would like to have a sex slave. He said that he would not be negligent with her, and that Islam permitted this sort of thing. He was speaking the truth. The topic that he brought up is an old topic. I have been working on it for 2 years now. I was working with this man, a young man who liked women a lot. I was sympathetic to his situation, and also dedicated to my work. I was given the opportunity to visit Mecca, and when I did so, I brought up this man's situation to the muftis in Mecca. I told them that I had a question, since they were men who specialized in what was halal, and what was good, and who loved women. I said, "What is the law of sex slaves?" The mufti said, "With the law of sex slaves, there must be a Muslim nation at war with a Christian nation, or a nation which is not of the religion of Islam, and there must be prisoners of war." Is this forbidden by Islam? I asked. Absolutely not. Sex slaves are not forbidden by Islam. On the contrary, sex slaves are under a different law than the free woman. The free woman must be completely covered except for her face and hands, but the sex slave can be naked from the waist up. She differs a lot from the free woman. While the free woman requires a marriage contract, the sex slave does not. She only needs to be purchased by her husband, and that's it. Therefore, the sex slave is different than the free woman. Of course, I also asked religious experts in Kuwait about this issue, and they told me about the problem with the passionate man, or even the man who is committed to his religion. For every good man in our religion, the only solution for him, when forbidden women come around, if he's tempted to sin, then the solution to the issue is for him to purchase sex slaves. I hope that Kuwait will enact the law for this category of people, the sex slaves. I hope that a law will be enacted for this category, and they will open the door for this, just as they have opened the door for servants to come into the country. They should open the door for sex slaves by enacting a sound law so that our children don't waste away in the abyss of adultery and moral depravity. Allah willing, this will work out. I believe, look, the sex slaves could come from a country like Chechnya, where there is war between an Islamic state and another state. Certainly there are prisoners. These prisoners could be purchased. They could be purchased and sold to the merchants in Kuwait. This is better than the merchants committing that which is forbidden. There is nothing wrong with this. Harun al-Rashid, the Abbasid Caliph from 786 to 809, had many more sex slaves than this. When he died, he had 2,000 sex slaves, but he only had one wife. This was not forbidden. Our Sharia permits such a thing as this. Praise be to Allah. Here in Kuwait, there are many merchants who are committed to Islam. I hope the best for Kuwait, Allah willing. Unfortunately, this isn't the view of just a couple of nutcases. Boko Haram, the notorious jihad group in Nigeria that ultimately allied with the Islamic State, made international headlines and inspired Michelle Obama to join the #BringBackOurGirls protest on Twitter in April 2014, when it captured over 200 non-Muslim girls and pressed them into sex slavery. And for some Muslims living in the West, Islamic justifications for enslaving infidel women captured in war seem to have bled over into an attitude that the daughters of their non-Muslim neighbors are fair game. From Yorkshire to Minneapolis, groups of Muslim men have engaged in sex trafficking and the forced prostitution of non-Muslim women on an appalling scale. Britain has seen a horrifying number of cases of Asian sex gangs. Asian is a common euphemism for Muslim in the British media. Groups of Muslim men who cajole or kidnap non-Muslim girls, often in their early teens, and force them into prostitution. As many as 1,400 minors may have been abused in this way in Rotherham, South Yorkshire alone, the British city where the phenomenon first came to light. Meanwhile, Muslims from the Twin Cities area in Minnesota ran an interstate sex trafficking ring until they were caught and indicted in late 2010. The rules regulating sex slaves differ from those for free women, that is, Muslim women. The latter's body must be covered entirely except for her face and hands, whereas the sex slave is kept naked from the belly button on up. She is different from the free woman. The free woman has to be married properly to her husband, but the sex slave, he just buys her and that's that. Female Kuwaiti politician explains how sex slavery should work. But in the Islamic State, the trafficking in girls is not in any way surreptitious. Sex slavery is an institution recognized by law, and where the non-Muslim world sees barbarism and cruelty, devout and knowledgeable young Muslims see the Islamic State's enslavement of young non-Muslim girls and gain respect for a group that is willing to defy the world's opprobrium to practice what it regards as pure Islam. The Islamic State made this abundantly clear in the October 2014 issue of its Dabiq magazine, in which it said, enslaving the families of the kuffar, non-believers, and taking their women as concubines is a firmly established aspect of the Sharia. In a November 2014 video of gleeful Islamic State jihadis laughing and bantering at a sex slave auction, one of the fighters declares, "Today is the slave market day. Today is the day where this verse applies. Guard your private parts, except with their wives and the captives whom their right hand possesses. For them they are not to be blamed." The Islamic State amplified this point in December 2014, when it issued a pamphlet explaining how sex slaves should be treated and why the practice was acceptable in Islam. The pamphlet was entirely in line with classic Islamic theology regarding sex slaves. It explained that al-Sabi, the slave, was a woman from among Ahl al-Harb, the people of war, who has been captured by Muslims, that is, a non-Muslim woman, taken as the spoils of war. It was permitted to use these women in this way because of their unbelief. Unbelieving women who were captured and brought into the abode of Islam are permissible to us, after the Imam distributes them among us. The Islamic State asserted that there is no dispute among the scholars that it is permissible to capture unbelieving women who are characterized by original unbelief, kufr asli, such as the Kitabiyat, women from among the people of the book, that is, Jews and Christians, and polytheists. However, the scholars are disputed over the issue of capturing apostate women. In other words, there was some question over whether women who had left Islam could be used as sex slaves, but since the consensus leans towards forbidding it, the Islamic State announced that it was inclined not to use ex-Muslim women in this way. It is permissible to have sexual intercourse with the female captive. Allah the Mighty said, "Successful are the believers who guard their chastity, except from their wives or the captives and slaves that their right hand possesses. For then they are free from blame." Quran, chapter 23, verses 5 and 6. From a pamphlet on sex slaves issued by the Research and Fatwa Department of the Islamic State. Other rules allow Muslims to buy, sell, or give as a gift female captives and slaves, for they are merely property, which can be disposed of, as long as that doesn't cause the Muslim Ummah any harm or damage. An owner cannot sell his slave if she becomes pregnant by him. Upon his death, his slaves will be distributed as part of his estate, just as all other parts of his estate are distributed. The instructions are quite detailed. A man may not have intercourse with the female slave of his wife, because the slave is owned by someone else. A man may not kiss the female slave of another, for kissing involves pleasure, and pleasure is prohibited unless the man owns the slave exclusively. And if a slave gets out of line, it is permissible to beat the female slave. A runaway is to be reprimanded in such a way that deters others like her from escaping. It is forbidden for a Muslim man to marry his slaves, except under certain strict circumstances. The Islamic State's guidelines on sex slavery are remarkably similar to what the other proponents of the practice had said several years before the Islamic State was established, and no wonder.